I've noticed them appearing in the edges of old photos, not the ones you'd find in textbooks or scholarly publications, but in vintage photographs with that grainy sepia quality that somehow makes everything feel simultaneously more authentic and less definable. These images captured extraordinarily tall individuals, people whose existence challenges the accepted story we've been handed about human physical boundaries and evolutionary norms. Then, just like that, they vanished. Not through any gradual process or some traceable decline in average stature that medical records could verify, but abruptly. Around 1800, perhaps as late as 1850, the photographic evidence undergoes a dramatic shift where these giants simply cease to appear. And the more deeply I investigated this gap, the more it seemed to align with something we've already examined in this series: the swift disappearance of Tartaria itself. The connections feel far too exact to dismiss as mere chance. Let me clarify what I'm observing here. These aren't carnival attractions or the rare genetic anomalies we occasionally encounter today. The documented cases of gigantism or acromegaly that medical science understands. Instead, these are people, often several individuals within a single photograph, who seem to stand 7, 8, or 9 feet tall, sometimes even taller, and they're captured not as spectacles, but as ordinary community members standing alongside families, working at construction sites, dressed as soldiers, farmers, or laborers. They seem woven into everyday existence in ways that suggest their presence was completely unremarkable for that time period. And this pattern emerges with disturbing consistency. There's a photograph from Siberia, taken around 1870, showing 3 men positioned next to a standard doorframe. The doorframe itself reaches 12 feet high, which I verified by measuring it against the known dimensions of the building that still exists today. 2 of the men appear normal in height, while the third has to bend slightly to fit, wearing work clothes and looking utterly bored, as if this isn't some staged celebration of an oddity, but simply a work crew going about their business. Another image from the American frontier, dated 1883, depicts a group of railroad workers, 7 men total, with 3 of them towering over the others by what looks like 3 feet or more, again dressed in work clothes with exhausted expressions and the relaxed posture of people simply doing their jobs, not performing or being put on display. The mundane nature of these images makes their subject matter all the more remarkable and unsettling to consider. And here's the most peculiar aspect. These photographs exist in considerable numbers up to a certain point. Then they cease entirely, not gradually or with decreasing frequency, but as though someone flipped a switch, as if the giants themselves suddenly weren't there anymore to be photographed. This prompts a straightforward yet crucial question. Where did they disappear to? And that's when the mudflood becomes impossible to dismiss. We've examined the evidence in earlier episodes: cities submerged beneath meters of sediment, first floors converted into basements, streets elevated, entire ground-level architecture buried and erased from memory, revealing a worldwide pattern of what seems to be a catastrophic burial event occurring sometime during the mid to late 1800s. The timing matches almost exactly with when giants vanish from photographic records. Not roughly or approximately, but nearly perfectly aligned. I found myself wondering whether the mudflood was merely a geological phenomenon, or if it represented a reset, a deliberate erasure of not just structures and infrastructure, but of the people who comprehended them, the beings capable of operating, maintaining, and explaining them. What if the physical burial of the old world happened alongside the physical elimination of its protectors? Consider what remains. We have the outer shells of Tartarian structures, repurposed and renamed with their original purposes, obscured or lost. We have the basement windows and submerged ground floors. We have the excessively large doorways that now serve normal-sized humans, yet seem perpetually oversized and unnecessarily grand for their alleged function. What we don't have are the operators, the maintainers, the protectors. The giants are gone, and with them went the operational understanding of the civilization they safeguarded. In our previous investigation, we examined the possibility that these giants functioned as guardians of Tartarian knowledge and infrastructure, with the massive doorways, the oversized architectural elements, and the basement windows, now at ground level, all pointing toward beings who were literally larger than life. Beings who might have maintained, protected, or even operated the advanced systems we've been documenting throughout this series. The physical evidence repeatedly suggests operators of exceptional size and presumably exceptional ability. But guardians of what precisely, and why would their disappearance be necessary? Examine the architecture once more, not just its scale but its intended purpose. These structures weren't merely large, they demonstrated sophistication that seemed to surpass the supposed technological capacity of their era. Incorporating free energy systems if the atmospheric electricity theories hold any validity, harmonic resonance chambers, advanced water and air circulation, and construction built with a precision that modern engineers find difficult to explain, let alone recreate using the tools allegedly available in the 1800s. The technological advancement seems purposefully designed for operators who could function at an enhanced physical scale. So what if these giants weren't just protectors of buildings, but of knowledge itself? Operational knowledge. The kind of understanding that can't be transcribed or easily transferred. The kind requiring physical presence, demonstration, and embodied expertise. The official explanation falls apart here, because if these beings existed, and the photographic evidence indicates they did, then their sudden disappearance creates a crisis for conventional historical narratives. You can't simply lose an entire category of humanity without explanation, without records, without documentation of disease or conflict, or any of the typical mechanisms through which populations decline, unless their disappearance was orchestrated, unless someone determined they needed to be erased from history completely. The further I delved into historical records, what little exists, the more I noticed patterns of disruption clustering around this same period. The mid to late 1800s weren't just a time of political turmoil or industrial revolution, but a time of strange gaps in the historical record, with hospital records that suddenly terminate, census data that becomes inconsistent or disappears entirely, whole years where certain types of documentation simply don't exist. Not destroyed by fires or wars, but missing as though they were never created or were systematically eliminated. The gaps in documentation seem too consistent and too intentional to be explained by simple neglect or accident. And here's where it becomes uncomfortable. What documentation does survive often contradicts itself, with heights recorded in military records that seem impossibly tall. Medical anomalies noted once then never referenced again. Mentions of unusually large individuals appearing in one source, yet completely absent from another account of the same event. The evidence points toward something far more significant than mere record-keeping mistakes. Look at the photographs again, the ones that still exist. Many have been altered in subsequent reprintings, the scale normalized, the tall individuals reduced to normal proportions through careful cropping or, in more recent times, digital manipulation. I've located original glass plates and compared them to published versions, and the modifications are undeniable. Someone has been actively working to make these images vanish, or at least appear less anomalous, less impossible. The effort to normalize or erase these images seems systematic rather than random or accidental. But why? This is where the mystery transforms into something almost unbearable. Because if the mud flood was a worldwide event, and the evidence strongly indicates it was, then its coordination implies something extraordinary. You cannot bury multiple continents beneath meters of sediment through random geological processes, not simultaneously, not with the precision we observe in the architectural record. If the disappearance of the giants was connected to this event, then we're examining a coordinated erasure on a scale that defies comprehension, a global effort to remove not just people but the memory of people, to scrub them from photographs, from records, from collective consciousness. The logistical challenges of such an undertaking would demand organization and resources that officially didn't exist at that time, and the pattern repeats across the globe. North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, everywhere we find Tartarian architecture. We also find this same peculiar gap in the human record. This same period where exceptionally tall individuals simply vanish from documentation. Not through war, not through plague, not through any of the mechanisms by which populations typically decline. They're just gone. And the societies that remained seem to have collectively agreed to pretend they never existed, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully comprehend, as if a script had been written and everyone knew their lines. The silence was deafening, and the uniformity of that silence across cultures and continents is perhaps even more disturbing. Let me return to what we've already established regarding Tartarian technology, the atmospheric electricity systems, the harmonic resonance architecture, the water and air purification mechanisms integrated into the very structure of these massive buildings. All of this demanded expertise to operate and maintain. You don't construct machinery that's sophisticated and then simply abandon it. You don't create systems that complex without leaving detailed operational manuals, training programs, or succession plans. Unless the knowledge was never intended to be written down. Unless it was embodied knowledge held by specific individuals who could physically interact with systems designed for their scale and capabilities. The absence of written technical documentation might not represent lost records, but rather knowledge never meant for documentation in the first place. Giants standing 8, 9, or 10 feet tall could reach components housed in ceilings that now seem merely decorative, could manipulate mechanisms built into architectural features we've reinterpreted as purely aesthetic, could operate at a scale that made sense of buildings whose proportions now seem excessive, wasteful, or illogical. Once you recognize it, you can't ignore it. The buildings weren't oversized for human use, but perfectly proportioned for their intended operators. And when those operators disappeared, the buildings became museums of a technology we can no longer access. Beautiful shells housing systems we no longer understand, maintained by custodians we no longer remember. Their disappearance transformed functional technology into inexplicable architecture, converting purpose into mere aesthetics and historical curiosity. What haunts me most isn't the presence of giants in old photographs, but their absence in current narratives, the complete and total silence about what should be one of the most significant anthropological questions of our time. Where did they go? Why did they go? Who decided their existence should be erased from official history? And not why, not when, not under what authority, but how? How do you coordinate a global erasure of this magnitude? How do you convince or compel or coerce entire societies into forgetting a whole category of human beings? How do you maintain that silence across generations, across cultures, across continents? The mechanisms required for such comprehensive erasure suggest coordination at levels that officially have never existed. The mud flood may provide part of the answer, a catastrophic event, whether natural or engineered, that literally buried the old world, forcing survivors to dig out, rebuild, and reorient. In the chaos of such a reset, memory becomes malleable. Official narratives can be written by whoever emerges with power and resources. And if the giants were specifically targeted for removal, either physically eliminated or relocated somewhere beyond the reach of conventional society, then the Mudflood would provide perfect cover. Blame their disappearance on the catastrophe. Fold their absence into the general trauma of the reset. Wait a generation or two for direct memory to fade, then simply deny they ever existed at all. Rewrite the textbooks, suppress the photographs, and wait for time to complete the erasure. I keep returning to a single thought. What knowledge died with the giants? We're told we're living in an era of unprecedented technological advancement, that every generation improves upon the last, that progress is linear and inevitable. But what if we're actually living in a dark age? What if the technology we've lost, the free energy systems, the harmonic architecture, the sophisticated understanding of atmospheric electricity, what if that was actually superior to what we have now? What if we're mistaking our recovery from catastrophic loss for genuine progress forward into new territory? The buildings suggest as much. They're more durable than modern construction, more energy efficient, more harmonious with natural systems, and they were allegedly built with technology far more primitive than what we possess today, unless they weren't. Unless the builders had access to knowledge we've lost. Knowledge that might have been held and transmitted by the very guardians who disappeared after 1800. The deeper I investigate, the more it seems we're not climbing towards some technological pinnacle, but climbing back up from a fall, recovering fragments of wisdom we once possessed and then somehow lost or had taken from us. And the giants knew. They were the bridge between the old world and the new. They were the living connection to Tartarian knowledge. And when they were removed, however that removal was accomplished, the bridge burned behind them. We may be technological orphans struggling to rediscover what was once common knowledge to a vanished people. I don't have answers, and I'm not certain anyone does, but the questions themselves are worth asking, even if, especially if, they make us uncomfortable. Why do the photographs stop? Why does documentation of extremely tall individuals vanish from the record after a specific date? Why does this disappearance coincide so precisely with the Mudflood events we've documented? Who benefited from their removal? What systems of power were threatened by their existence or by the knowledge they protected? And perhaps most disturbing, if such a coordinated global erasure was possible then, what prevents it from happening again? What other truths might have been buried beneath meters of mud and generations of silence? What categories of human experience might we be living through right now without recognizing as historically significant? The giants are gone. The buildings remain hollow and repurposed, and we're left with fragments, photographs that seem impossible, architectural features that make no sense, doorways built for bodies that officially never existed. The official history tells us we're seeing things that aren't there, that we're finding patterns where none exist, that the photographs are misinterpreted, the scale distorted, the evidence unconvincing. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the absence, the vast echoing absence where the giants should be, that absence itself is evidence. A negative space in history, a void shaped exactly like the truth we're not allowed to remember. The emptiness they left behind speaks louder than any documentation that survived their removal from our collective memory. What do you think? Have you noticed these patterns? Share your thoughts in the comments. But be aware the algorithm doesn't want this discussed. The guardians are gone. The world they protected has been buried and forgotten. and we're left asking the simplest, most essential question. What else don't we remember? What else have we been taught to forget? Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.